Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. As Lily plans her next course of action, Kane's stubborn streak portends trouble. Tensions rise in Genoa City as Lily keeps a symbolic dagger on hand for when the time is appropriate, and Kane's stubbornness to back down creates the conditions for further conflict. According to spoilers on The Young and the Restless, Kane Ashby's encounter with Jack Abbott was enlightening. He thought he could sway Jabbo, the head of the Abbott family, and Abbott Media's only source of funding, which further demonstrated why Kane's schemes are illogical. Fans are aware that it is midday, and Kane may disclose at any time how he plans to seize control of the historic businesses in Genoa City, Wisconsin. The Abbott family's companies, Winters Incorporated and Newman Enterprises, which includes Chancellor, might not be able to stop a hostile takeover without some soap opera magic. However, this metropolis has a hidden weapon, and it's Lily Winters. She is holding a symbolic dagger, which is meant to be a clear allusion to the vintage blade that killed Damian Kane. What if Kane gives up his takeover ambitions in exchange for a reunion with Lily? Why did that strange thing happen in France? Getting Lily to his estate without her noticing him was Kane's primary goal. Thus, the Aristotle Dumas ruse was extended through the event he hosted on his European train car, and it was successful in that strange labyrinth. However, Kane also thought that his extravagant affair would sway the views of everyone present, or at least enough of them. Additionally, he intended to trap them there while completing a number of real estate transactions in GC and assign Holden Novak to collect as much intelligence as he could while everyone was away. Kane Ashby does not have delusions. Fans were told that although Kane has some huge ideas, he is not delusional. That fact is confirmed by Victor Newman's remarks prior to his knowledge of Aristotle Dumas. Since Aristotle was an invisible competitor for business interests, Victor claimed to be familiar with him. The assumption is that Victor adopted the Aristotelian persona after losing against Kane. But in some way, his late father, Colin Atkinson, managed to acquire a fortune worth billions of dollars. Kane's power is symbolized by that money in the shape of different tangible and intangible goods. Therefore, the threat that Arabesque poses to the businesses that each of the GC's power brokers currently leads is not being downplayed. Lily Winters is still in love. Lily claims that she finds Kane repulsive. However, Devon Winters believes that his sister is still dealing with Kane. Devon thinks Lily is wary of Kane and has her eyes open. However, they were married twice and have children together. The audience can tell that she is clearly impacted by his presence, even if that last union ended with a difficult breakup. Lily believes she is acting from a position of strength by attempting to negotiate with Kane. Kane has been forthright with many people about his goals, even though it's true that his heart is still open to her. Lily is keeping in touch with Kane and heeding Victor's advice. However, her intention to stop his business plan will conflict with his desire to remarry her. For many, the result and consequences should have a profound effect. As Lily Winters began to carefully plan her next course of action, the tension in Genoa City thickened like a storm cloud preparing to break, and although she had told herself repeatedly that she was prepared for whatever battle lay ahead, the reality of Kane Ashby's stubborn streak loomed over her every move, portending trouble that would not easily be extinguished. Her symbolic dagger kept not as a literal weapon but as a reminder of the choices and betrayals that had shaped her path. A relic, echoing the vintage blade that once ended Damian Kane's life, rested in her drawer as a psychological talisman, a reminder that she might have to cut ties with her past, her love, and perhaps even her better self if Kane refused to yield. Meanwhile Kane, convinced that his ambitions would elevate him above every family empire in town, had walked into his meeting with Jack Abbott certain that he could not only sway Jabbo but also manipulate the head of the Abbott family into becoming a reluctant partner. Yet the encounter was far more enlightening for Kane than he had anticipated because Jack, with his shrewd understanding of power dynamics, quickly revealed that he saw right through Kane's charm and half-truths, a reality that only reinforced how illogical and reckless Kane's schemes truly were, even if his charisma could sometimes mask that fact. The daylight hours of Genoa City carried with them an uneasy suspense, as fans of the drama knew that at any moment Kane might disclose the full scale of his takeover plan, a plan that threatened not only the Abbott Empire but also Winters Incorporated and Newman Enterprises, and even the historic Chancellor Industries, which had stood as cornerstones of stability in the city for decades, leaving residents and loyalists of each company anxiously bracing for fallout that could only be countered, in the logic of soap opera magic, by dramatic interventions, whispered alliances, and unexpected betrayals. But Genoa City, though often a place where egos clashed and dynasties rose and fell, had its secret weapon, and that weapon was Lily Winters, a woman who knew both Kane's heart and his hunger, who had suffered and loved beside him, and who now carried not only her symbolic dagger but also the painful awareness that she might have to wield it metaphorically against the father of her children if he continued on this dangerous path. And what if, in a turn of fate, Kane could be persuaded to abandon his reckless ambitions in exchange for the possibility of reconciling with Lily, of rebuilding the shattered fragments of a marriage that had endured passion, betrayal, forgiveness, and devastation, not once but twice, their shared history an anchor that kept pulling them toward each other even when pride and fury tried to keep them apart. Was it possible that beneath Kane's calculated maneuvers and ruthless streak there was still a man who wanted nothing more than to be with her, who believed that conquering Genoa City's business world was somehow the only way to prove his worthiness to her? The question lingered like smoke, impossible to avoid and yet equally impossible to answer, especially given the bizarre sequence of events that had unfolded in France, when Kane had managed to lure Lily to his estate under the guise of an elaborate deception involving the mysterious Aristotle Dumas, a ruse that stretched across an entire European train car and a strange labyrinth of diversions, an affair so extravagant that it demonstrated not only Kane's cunning but also his reckless overconfidence. The event had indeed been a success in its immediate goal. Kane got Lily to his side, away from her familiar safety net, and surrounded by a world built entirely on his terms. But in typical Kane fashion, he had led the trap with ulterior motives, believing that if he could impress, overwhelm, or at least corner his guests, their opinions would shift, and their allegiances would tilt toward him, thus bolstering his broader scheme to gain influence in Genoa City while Holden Novak, his quiet but ambitious associate, collected intelligence back home in Wisconsin during their absence. Kane's mistake, however, was underestimating the resilience of the very people he sought to manipulate. For while his ideas were undeniably grand and at times brilliant, fans were constantly reminded that Kane was not delusional. His ambition was grounded in reality, but his execution was riddled with arrogance, impatience, and the inability to see when his strategies were self-destructive, a flaw that Victor Newman himself had once pointed out when he revealed his familiarity with the enigmatic Aristotle Dumas, a name that Kane had used to mask his moves in the market. Victor, the master strategist, had been quick to suggest that perhaps Kane's mysterious rival was not a phantom at all but a persona that he himself had adopted in earlier battles, further complicating the question of whether Kane was acting alone or manipulating echoes of others' power to project strength. Still, the true weight of Kane's leverage came not from tricks or impersonations but from the fortune left behind by his late father, Colin Atkinson, who despite his notorious reputation had managed to accumulate billions in tangible and intangible assets, money that now served as both a weapon and a shield for Kane's ventures, money that allowed him to stand toe-to-toe with titans like Victor and Jack, and money that made his threats far more dangerous than many wanted to admit. It was this wealth, funneled through his entity Arabesque, that posed a direct threat to the legacies of the city's great business families, and while his ambition had the potential to reshape Genoa City, it also guaranteed that a collision with Lily was inevitable. For Lily Winters was not merely a woman scorned or a business rival, she was someone who still loved him in spite of her words, someone who could never fully detach herself from the father of her children, someone whose heart was torn between disgust and yearning, between strength and vulnerability. She told Devon and others that she found Kane repulsive, that his schemes disgusted her and his refusal to change exhausted her. But Devon, ever the perceptive brother, reminded her that wounds of love often run deeper than words, and that whether she admitted it or not, Kane's presence still unsettled her, still stirred feelings she would rather ignore. They had been married twice, had built a family together, and though their second union had ended in a devastating breakup, the residue of that love clung to her like a shadow, undeniable in its persistence. Lily convinced herself that she was acting from a position of strength, believing that by keeping Kane close, by negotiating with him directly, she could control the fallout. But what she did not realize was that Kane, in his own way, was being equally forthright. His business plans, his ruthless maneuvers, and his desire to reclaim her heart were not separate ambitions but intertwined goals, each fueling the other, each feeding his determination to prove that he could bend the city and Lily alike to his will. Victor's advice had been clear. Keep in contact with Kane, learn his moves, anticipate his strategies, and wait for the moment when the dagger, whether symbolic or strategic, could be thrust to stop him. But Victor had not anticipated the complication of Lily's heart, the fact that Kane's desire for her could just as easily derail his schemes as it could embolden them. And so Genoa City braced itself for what promised to be an explosive clash, a war fought not only in boardrooms and hidden estates but also in the intimate, fragile space between two people who could neither live together nor truly let go. A battle where every whispered memory of love could become a weapon and every business deal a battlefield, and where the outcome, for better or worse, would reshape not only the fates of the Newman, Abbott, and Winters families but also the legacy of Lily and Kane themselves. As Lily Winters wrestled with the duality of her heart and mind, Genoa City seemed to thrum with a restless energy, each corner of the metropolis carrying whispers of Kane Ashby's next move, and though she told herself that she could control the narrative, her hands trembled slightly every time she brushed against the hilt of the symbolic dagger she kept tucked away, its mere presence reminding her of the fine line she walked between business pragmatism and personal devastation. Kane's stubbornness was legendary, and his refusal to back down from his ambitions even in the face of rising opposition was not only reckless but also oddly seductive, because beneath his power plays and his insatiable hunger for control was still the man she had once loved fiercely, the man who had fathered her children, the man who had held her in their darkest hours, and though she despised admitting it, she could not entirely sever the emotional tether that tied her to him, a tether that Kane seemed to exploit with every lingering glance, every half-truth laced with charm, every unexpected confession that made her wonder whether he was playing her or genuinely reaching for redemption. His meeting with Jack Abbott had sent ripples across the city, for Jack, unimpressed by Kane's pitch to sway Jabot into alignment with Arabesque, had quickly confided to Phyllis that Kane was walking into quicksand, and though Phyllis smirked at Kane's audacity, she was equally aware that audacity sometimes won wars in Genoa City, a town where fortunes rose and fell in a single boardroom confrontation, and so she quietly warned Jack not to underestimate the Ashby charm because men like Kane had a way of turning losses into leverage. Indeed, Kane left the Abbott encounter more enlightened than defeated, because he now understood that his path to dominance required not only financial weight but also emotional manipulation. And who better to manipulate than Lily, who was already caught between her loyalty to Devon, her sense of duty to Winters Incorporated, and the undeniable pull she still felt toward him. While Kane plotted, he also replayed in his mind the success of his elaborate European escapade, the Aristotle Dumas masquerade on the train car in France where he had orchestrated an atmosphere of mystery, luxury, and danger, believing that if he could control the environment, he could control the hearts and minds within it. And to an extent he had succeeded, for Lily had come, she had stayed longer than she intended, and though she maintained a facade of disdain, Kane noticed the flicker in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice, the subtle way she leaned toward him when she thought no one else was looking, signs that her hatred was not pure, that something deeper was simmering beneath her resistance. Holden Novak, loyal yet ambitious, had spent that time in Genoa City gathering intelligence, securing data on Abbott and Newman holdings, and mapping out vulnerabilities within Winters Incorporated, and when Kane returned, he was emboldened by the knowledge that he not only had money but also the information needed to destabilize the city's most powerful players. But what Kane underestimated was the quiet storm gathering in Lily, who was far from a pawn in his game and had begun to think of her symbolic dagger not just as a reminder of strength but as a tool she might one day wield to cut him off once and for all, because though her heart trembled at his presence, her mind screamed at her to remember the betrayals, the heartbreaks, and the endless cycle of lies that had left her rebuilding her life from ashes more than once. Devon watched closely, cautioning his sister that Kane's charm was the venom of a serpent, sweet to the ear but deadly once swallowed. Yet Devon too saw that Lily was not immune to Kane, and this realization filled him with dread, because if Kane could weave his way back into Lily's heart under the guise of reconciliation, he might gain not only emotional leverage but also direct influence over Winters Incorporated, potentially using Lily as an entry point to dismantle her own company's defenses against Arabesque's encroachment. Meanwhile, Victor Newman, having dealt with countless rivals across decades of ruthless business battles, analyzed Kane with a mix of admiration and suspicion, acknowledging that Kane was not delusional. His father Colin's billions gave him tangible power, his intelligence made him a formidable adversary, and his charisma added the kind of unpredictability that often unseated even the most calculated strategies. But Victor also saw that Kane's weakness was Lily, and in true Victor fashion, he considered whether exploiting that weakness might be the surest way to neutralize him. Whispers of Kane's plans spread through Newman Enterprises, Chancellor, and Jabot alike, as executives speculated about whether he intended a hostile takeover, a merger, or some hybrid scheme designed to destabilize his rivals before swooping in with Arabesque's resources. And though some dismissed him as reckless, others remembered how many times in the past audacious outsiders had toppled dynasties in Genoa City. Lily, caught in the center of this storm, rehearsed conversations in her mind, imagining scenarios where Kane dropped everything: his takeover plans, his manipulations, his relentless hunger just to be with her again. And though she told herself such imaginings were foolish, she could not erase them, could not ignore the ache in her chest when she pictured a reconciliation that might rewrite their story for a third time. Even as she knew such a reunion would come with a cost, her nights were restless, her dreams filled with images of Kane extending his hand to her while the dagger gleamed in her own, a metaphorical reminder that to accept him might mean betraying herself, her family, and everything she had rebuilt, while to reject him outright might plunge Kane further into the darkness of ambition, making him not only a threat to her heart but a danger to the entire city. The more she tried to strategize, the more she realized that her symbolic dagger was not just a weapon against Kane but perhaps also a weapon against her own weakness, a reminder to cut through the fog of nostalgia and face the brutal truth. Kane Ashby would never change, not truly, and his schemes, no matter how dazzling, were built on the quicksand of pride. Yet Kane, in his late-night reflections, believed differently, convincing himself that if Lily saw him victorious standing as a titan alongside Victor, Jack, and Devon, she would finally understand his worth, finally admit that her resistance was not born of hatred but of fear of loving a man who could not be controlled. Thus the stage was set for an inevitable confrontation, a collision where business strategy would intertwine with personal longing, where every meeting in the boardroom was laced with unspoken intimacy, and where every whispered exchange risked tipping the balance of power. Genoa City's residents, watching from the sidelines, could sense that history was about to pivot, that the clash between Lily's determination to protect her family and Kane's relentless pursuit of dominance would either end in destruction or in the kind of shocking twist that only soap opera fate could deliver, perhaps even a reunion that no one expected but everyone secretly craved. Because in the end, love and ambition were the twin engines that kept the city alive, and in the hearts of Lily and Kane, those engines burned hotter than ever, driving them toward a destiny that neither could fully control but both were powerless to escape. The morning after Kane's name began swirling in whispers of takeover talk, Genoa City awoke with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the very air, the kind of pressure that comes before a storm, and in the quiet of her office. Lily Winters stared at the symbolic dagger she kept hidden in her drawer, running her fingertips over its hilt as if drawing strength from the cold steel, because she knew the moment was approaching when Kane would force her hand, when his relentless ambition would collide with her determination to protect not just Winters Incorporated but her children, her family, and even herself. She could not deny that Kane had already cornered her emotionally, the ache in her chest undeniable whenever she recalled the memories of love they once shared. Yet she reminded herself of the devastation that had followed every time she let him back in, and she feared that if she faltered now, the cost would not simply be her heart but the survival of every company tied to Genoa City's legacy. Kane, meanwhile, paced within the shadowed confines of his Arabesque headquarters, rehearsing lines for the announcement he intended to make, an announcement designed not only to shock but to destabilize, because, in his mind, seizing control of Newman and Jabot simultaneously was the only way to prove that he was not simply Colin Atkinson's son or Lily Winters' ex-husband, but a man worthy of shaping the future of the city itself. And though Holden Novak urged caution, reminding him that even Victor Newman rarely declared war on two dynasties at once, Kane silenced him with the conviction of a man who believed destiny was already written in his favor. Across town, Jack Abbott confided in Ashley that Kane's ambitions were illogical yet dangerous precisely because he was willing to risk everything, and Phyllis, overhearing, smirked knowingly, predicting that Kane's audacity would drag Lily back into his orbit whether she wanted it or not. Because women did not simply walk away from men like Cain Ashby, men who made destruction look romantic, men who turned betrayal into passion, men who wielded power not only in business but in the fragility of the heart. And indeed, Lily felt the pull that very afternoon when Cain arrived unannounced at her office, his presence filling the room before he even spoke, his voice low and intoxicating as he insisted that he wasn't there to talk business but to ask her a question that had been haunting him. What if all of this, arabesque, the deals, the posturing, is just my way of trying to prove myself to you?